Welcome back to the Quantum Yoga Podcast. We're here today with Mike Dannheim, who's the co-founder of a really exciting app called the Sensie app. Thanks, Mike, for coming on the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jonathan. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm trying to figure out what exactly would be the right entry point here, but I think probably a good thing is just give us a kind of a quick overview of the Sensie app before we get into the depth of the research that went into it.
Right on. Thanks, man. So the depth, I guess what Sensie app is we've used for the last. I'll just kind of give the overarching story on Sensie, which is that we spent the last couple of years applying sensors to the body to see if we could come up with an objective signal for what's known as the manual muscle test. And where we landed was using the gyroscope and accelerometer, so two common sensors in smartphones, to create an objective signal for the muscle test. And that's what Sensie is. So Sensie provides an accurate signal based on the body's response to any topics that people would like to explore. So that's sort of what Sensie is currently doing.
And on the website, you have it listed as a stress identification tool.
Yeah, so that's a good question to ask. It's a good one to start with too. We've moved to the language of stress because we started using the language of muscle testing, and what we found was that not a lot of people are aware of muscle testing. And then the people who are well entrenched in muscle testing don't, at least the doctor side of it, don't really they didn't see as much value in the signal itself because they are so well versed at using the signal manually. And they weren't as interested in the extended reach. And so what we started to explore with doctors who are outside of the world of muscle testing was, here's the signal we have for the body. What could this be? What could this represent? And what we discovered was that it's a signal for stress and the stress response of the body. And so we did our homework on stress, and 60% of all human illness and disease, everything from mental illness to diabetes to heart disease, is stress related. And so we thought it'd be a pretty cool idea to further, investigate how we could use this objective signal on a device that everybody already has, a smartphone, to help empower people to take health and well-being back into their hands. And so that's what we've been working on. And that's why we're using sort of the language of stress, that everybody knows what stress is for the most part, and most people know they don't want it. So now we have a signal for it, and we're exploring the best use cases to bring that into the world to help people.
Awesome. Well, let's actually define manual muscle testing and provide a broader scope for people, and we'll circle back to the app itself after we get through that bit.
Right on. Yeah, sounds like a good idea. Yeah, and I like that too, especially since your audience is more yoga based, right? And in the world of yoga and spirituality, muscle testing is much more well accepted. It's when we get to the medical community that we really start orienting it more to stress.
Well, I would say the community itself, and I'm using this word yoga loosely as it means union, and that's what I'm trying to do in understanding various health systems, consciousness systems. It's not about Indian practices. Does that make sense? So I think just come from a more scientific explanation, if you can, of what's going on, rather than trying to craft it towards a yoga asana audience.
About muscle testing in general. So broadly speaking, so muscle testing has been around for thousands of years. It actually started in Chinese medicine. And the premise is that the body has this innate knowledge in it of sort of what's good for it and what's not. If you listen to it, and if you listen to the body's sort of intuitive response, you can be guided by this system that you're sort of been divinely gifted, or your birthright. And so, Chinese medicine's been using it forever to figure out what type of remedies should be used for to help people heal, to help people with medicine, to help with nutrition. And what's really interesting, if we're doing the kind of the arc of muscle testing and how it got adopted by the West, we'll just go through sort of the medical community here and how it got introduced in the West. It showed up muscle testing showed up the first time actually at Harvard University, by Dr. Jeffrey Martin, and I think it was like 1918. It was in the early 1900s. And he was using it at the time to detect for infantile paralysis, and specifically targeting the specific muscle group that was causing the paralysis, and then also distinguishing if it was total paralysis, partial paralysis, and being able to isolate where it was coming from. And he published a paper out of Harvard, which it's on our website. And that was, the first time we saw it. One of the best universities in the U.S., being used in this really valid way to help distinguish and understand what's going on with infants and paralysis. What's interesting is that in terms of the timeline of the adoption of muscle testing, you didn't see it again until a little bit later, when Kendall and Kendall wrote a book on basically muscle performance. And what they did was they used muscle testing to better understand how the different muscle groups work with each other in collaboration, and muscle testing was sort of at the core of their work. Where muscle testing really made its big debut in the West was a Dr. Goodhart. So Dr. Goodhart in the 60s, he's a chiropractor, and he started using it in his practice to target and identify the cause of pain, right? So the idea being, as a yoga practitioner, if anyone's listening who's a yoga practitioner, you probably will identify with this message, which is, if your shoulder hurts, it might not actually be the shoulder. It might be your scapula, it might be something deeper, it might be somewhere in the ribs. And what you saw with Dr. Goodhart was he was using muscle testing to determine where, so if the pain was in the shoulder, is the root cause the shoulder, and using muscle testing to determine and distinguish where the problem was emanating from. And so Goodhart really made a big splash because he wound up, healing a lot of people and doing a lot of really good work, and was recognized and was actually the first chiropractor to be picked by the U.S. Olympic team. And he went with the U.S. Olympic team and did great work for them in terms of getting Olympiads back onto the battlefield to compete for the Olympics. What was really interesting about Goodhart is that he was sort of the first doctor to take it from just physical and moved it into psychological as well. So Goodhart was sort of the beginning in the West of this idea that we can use the body to determine what's causing suffering, what's causing sort of emotional duress, and targeting root cause by using the body's response to a series of questions. Excuse me. And he just did a lot of great work, Dr. Goodhart. And he had a counterpart named Dr. Diamond, who wrote a book called, oh gosh, I forgot now. I'm going to blank. Heal Your Body, I believe it is. Oh no, Your Body Doesn't Lie. That was it. Your Body Doesn't Lie. And so I actually find it really interesting that the two doctors who really sort of blew up muscle testing in the West, their names are Dr. Goodhart and Dr. Diamond. There's no irony there, right? I think that's a really interesting sort of eye catcher. But should I pause there? Or,
Well, so I guess I don't know if you can answer this because it's maybe out of the scope of your background. But this is when applied kinesiology is born, correct?
Yeah, Dr. Goodhart gave birth to applied kinesiology. That's correct.
As I understand it, this is a little bit about finding sources of musculoskeletal misalignment or pain, but this is also when practitioners are learning how to use something like nutritionals, where they can test the effect that a nutritional may have on someone's body.
Correct. Right. And that's another thing that Goodhart helped usher into the world here. But keep in mind, this is also being used in Chinese medicine for a very long time prior to Goodhart. It was just that Goodhart really was the first person in the U.S. medical community to sort of champion this. And, what you're mentioning is that to identify a food allergy or a sensitivity, that you would hold a food item in one hand, and then they would do a deltoid muscle test to see if there's a response of the body, a stress response of the body to the item that's in question. Which is a really big breakthrough, right? The idea that the body can help you identify what's good for you or not in terms of nutrition. And that's right. So, yeah.
Okay. So from there, Dr. Diamond comes into the picture, and they start basically evolving this applied kinesiology.
Yeah, and exactly. And he writes a book, as I mentioned, called Your Body Doesn't Lie. And what Dr. Diamond's work was also really focused on was the thymus gland and how that regulates the body's energy, um, and how it also interacts with muscle testing. Because one of the weird things of muscle testing, I don't know if this is too early to get into this, but it sort of comes up when you start reading Dr. Diamond's work, is sometimes when you're muscle testing, your results can get flipped. You can be upside down, which is weird. So like, you get a false for a yeah, you get a no for a yes and a yes for a no. And I might just not have seen it, but I saw it more from Diamond than I did Goodhart. In Diamond's work that we read, he's the one who starts pointing out how thumping the thymus gland can help to sort of flip you back, how sort of this like cranial tapping can also help to revert the lobes of the brain. And he starts to really investigate why people are getting flipped and how to get them back right-sided.
That's fascinating. And so then the question becomes, how would you know if you're flipped?
Well, right. That's a great question. So asking objectively true questions. So whenever you start a muscle testing, when you're going into sort of an inquiry, you should always start with an objective question that you have an idea for the outcome from. So for example, something like, my name is Mike, and then do a muscle test. My name is Kate, and do a muscle test. I live in Miami. I live in Tokyo. And these are questions to understand if you're in a good state or not. And you can also ask the question too. I'm sufficiently hydrated. I'm in balance. You can make that statement. So you can ask yourself the question and see how the body responds as well.
Okay.
But it's always good to start a session. I always do it, to start a session by asking yourself, one or two, we call them test questions, just to see if you're in a good state. Because hydration can also throw it off too, by the way. If you're not sufficiently hydrated, that can throw the signal off.
Okay. And then moving forward in the timeline, is that sort of the end of muscle testing, or is there more to come?
Well, so I don't. I kind of want to inject my opinion, but I don't want to go too much into my opinion on this. But muscle testing sort of goes through this dark age, I feel like, where in the sort of 80s and 90s, I'm going to leave names out, but there's some people who come and make some audacious claims about what you can do with muscle testing. And some of the claims, on the surface sound super interesting and cool and eye-catchy. But underneath it, I think they do more harm than good, because I think and this is just based on our reflecting on the history of muscle testing and what we sort of could parse out. What it looks like is that during this period of time, the medical community really starts to shun it because of some of these claims. Like the idea that some of the claims are like the idea that you can make a map of human consciousness using muscle testing, and maybe you can, but how do you verify that, right? And I think a good way to actually to base this part of the conversation is there's different types of truths, right? So there's objective truths. My name is Mike. My name is Kate. There's subjective truths. Pizza is good. You might not think so. I might. There's unknowable truths and there's unknown truths. And sort of after Goodhart and Diamond's work really caught fire, and Goodhart was doing great work for the Olympics, for the U.S. Olympic team, you see sort of lots of other people starting to adopt kinesiology and muscle testing and creating their own versions of it and making claims around these unknowable and unknown truths. So things that could never be verified or very hard to verify. And I think this is the time where muscle testing sort of gets this black eye of, this is a woo-woo-y fringe science, and really gets disregarded, which is really unfortunate, because it really does hold some really, a really important technique for humanity. But the cool part about it is we're having this resurgence now, right? Because then in 2015, out of Oxford University, one of the best universities in the world, Dr. Ann Jensen completes her whole PhD at Oxford, her whole dissertation on muscle testing and its reliability and validity, on its precision, reliability, and validity, and demonstrates that muscle testing is in fact, a reliable method to distinguish a true from false statement, more so than chance and intuition. And her research is readily available online. You can just Google her. And that's amazing, right? And so, sorry, a true from false statement is a gold standard for stress because of all the research on polygraphs. And so that's fascinating because that basically means that you were born with an instrument that can help you know what's, stressful and not stressful. You don't need our app. You already have the technology. You just need to learn how to trust it.
Okay.
Which is super cool.
Yeah. Well, just to drill down into a point that you made earlier about verifying unknowable truths and around, and I'm assuming you're referencing David Hawkins' work, but this idea, if you just do a cursory search on the web for muscle testing, you're going to get already a lot of sort of negative or pushback from the population at large, and that's even in regard to these, what we'll call objective truths. So what you're defining as objective truths. So I wonder if you have any opinion on that and why that still exists. Because I know quite a few people that have tested or have tried to learn muscle testing, and they just go, no, it doesn't work. It's unreliable. Is usually what I hear. It's an unreliable way of determining something going on in the body. And then some people that are absolutely convinced that this is the primary way. This is the ultimate test. It's the test to beat all tests.
Yeah. I'd love to share a story that I had that I think highlights exactly what you're talking about, and also at the same time just is like, oh my God, this is so sad that this is where we are as a species. So we've worked with a lot of different universities to help get research for our technology, and trying to get in the door when you talk about muscle testing with universities, it's like an immediate shot in the foot almost. There was one university in particular, though, where a really good one, really well known, where we got in, and they have a lady who's running innovation for the whole university for healthcare. And so we got in to speak with her. Really sweet, incredibly smart, incredibly talented. I sit down, I tell her about our technology, I show it to her. I tell her, first I tell her about, it's muscle testing, a direct signal for muscle testing. And I ask her if she knows what muscle testing is. And she kind of looks at me puzzled and says, no, I don't think so. And then I show her sort of the deltoid test. I'm like, you ever been to a doctor and they do this test? And all of a sudden she kind of recoils and she goes, yes, this is feeling eerily familiar. And I go, oh, I'm like, well, tell me. And she says, she goes, well, I had a back issue. I had a problem with my back, and I went to a doctor who I trust very much. And I sat down in his office, and he had me do what you just did, where I extended my arm, and he pressed on my forearm and asked a couple questions. And she said within about 10 seconds, he goes, you have something wrong with your C6 vertebrae. And I go, oh, that's amazing. And she goes, and I go, what did you do? And she goes, I looked at him. I got incredibly pissed off at him. I told him that this is absolutely insane, that within 10 seconds he could tell me there was something wrong with my back by pressing on my forearm, and I left. And I go, oh. And I said, okay, so what happened? And she goes, well, I went to another doctor. They did an MRI, they did the whole thing. And I was like, what was the outcome? And she goes, there was something wrong with my C6 vertebrae. And I just laughed. I'm like, and I think that story sort of is the problem, is I think that we've complicated healthcare and medicine so much so that we expect it to be complicated and long and arduous. And so we get what we expect, right? And so when something is as simple as querying your own body, I think it gets disregarded because it's too simple. I don't know for sure, but based on what I've seen and the experiences I've had in terms of the amount of rejection we've gotten, it seems to be that way. It seems that it's just such a simple thing. I don't know. I think it's probably more complicated than that, but that seems to be what might be a problem with it. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, I have to agree with you. I think people cannot believe the simplicity of life for the most part. And especially if the more educated someone is, quote unquote, right?
Oh yeah.
I feel like that is the indicator of how hard it is to believe the simplicity of some things. But what I do want to unpack for people is how is it being measured? Like, how is it being verified with technology, other than sort of a very basic self-test where then you take an action based off of the answer that you got from the muscle test, and that action leads you in the direction that the answer directed you. Does that make sense? So you're using some kind of technological feedback system to measure this.
Okay, right. If it's okay, I think I'll parse those into two separate questions, because I heard effectiveness, and then I heard what technology is being used to measure this. And if it's okay, just kind of parsing those into two separate questions, because I think effectiveness is going to be different based on what topics we're exploring. So, for example, is it effective for food allergies? Is it effective for identifying a wellness methodology, i.e. positive psychology, transcendental meditation, mindfulness meditation? Is it effective to identify people that I should stay away from? And is it effective to identify what level of consciousness I'm at, right? Do you know what I mean? So as in terms of effectiveness, it's going to be different based on what's being measured. So the other question about what kind of technology, maybe we dive into that first, and then we can talk about some of the stuff we've been studying that we've been getting really interesting results from. So the technology we use, and we have a whole presentation. We're supposed to be presenting for at Stanford. They have a neuroscience conference that we were going to show our technology at, but my wife gave birth, so I didn't make it. But we're going to go back out and show them. But I have a whole video and presentation. The video shows the sensor data alongside the gesture. So to unpack the technology and what we've created, it's really two parts. It's one part sensor, two part a unique gesture we created. So are you familiar with how the regular muscle test, so when a doctor administers, the deltoid one?
I am, yeah, but if you can explain that briefly for the listeners.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's a good baseline. So the traditional muscle test that a doctor uses is they have you're either standing or sitting. You extend your arm out in front of you so that it's long, and they press down. Basically, they hold your wrist or your forearm in that area, and then they do a light press. It shouldn't be too hard. And they press. They'll ask a question and they'll press. And what they're looking at is a recoil in the deltoid muscle. So if there is a deep recoil, stress is present. If there's no recoil, there's no stress. And that's the sort of traditional chiropractic, acupuncture, medical muscle test. And so what we did was we asked the question, which was, okay, how could we set it up so that an individual can do a muscle test without a doctor present while holding a smartphone? Because there's two sensors on a smartphone. There's an accelerometer and a gyroscope, and they're really good sensors. And we get a lot of data from that. And so we created this triple whip gesture. So you hold the phone and you do 3 whips. And the reason for the 3 whips is that you get 3 recoils from the wrist. And so we're basically replicating that same recoil from the deltoid, but in the hand. So as you whip the hand forward, there's a recoil. And we're basically getting the tell for the signal in that recoil. That's significant because in your mind you could say, okay, I don't want anyone to know this is stressful, so I'm going to try and hijack this and whip it really fast, and hopefully that'll look like no stress is present. But we're not measuring that. We're measuring the autonomous bounce of the hand. So it's the autonomous movement. So when you move that hand forward, you're not regulating the recoil. The body's governing that. And so that's what we're measuring is how that hand is responding. And we're capturing that data, in real time on the phone. What's really cool is that the phone has the capacity, now to process AI algorithms on the device in real time. So, there's some AI under the hood that basically looks at what, is more or less called the pitch, the frequency, and the amplitude between the 3 peaks of data. And based on the distance between the 3 peaks, we get a tell if stress is present or not. And that's how we're measuring it. Was that okay, or was that too much?
Yeah. Well, so what you're saying is that between the 3 peaks of those 3 movements that you do, those 3 gestures, if there is, so let me just kind of think through this a little bit. If there is less variance, then that would be more indicative of a true or a yes answer.
Right. Well, yes, and no. Sometimes less, sometimes more. It depends on the individual. So basically, it's unclassified data. So we don't we try not to dictate. We're not trying to tell the algorithms, hey, it should be this, it should be that. Instead, we say, okay, there's a calibration that happens. So in the beginning, when you first use Sensie, you have to calibrate the device. And Sensie says, okay, let's do a positive calibration. So smile, think about something that makes you happy, and then do the gesture. And you do that 3 times. So you do 3 triple whips. So now we have 3 groups of data that are positive. And then you do. Then it says, okay, let's think about something that's stressful. You can frown. You can think about paying your taxes, whatever it is that might stress you out, and then do 3 more. And actually, the way our algorithm works is that it takes those. It's unclassified, so that there's basically 6 data sets, and then there's a simple clustering algorithm that looks to cluster them into 1s and 2s. And then once it has it clustered into 1s and 2s, it looks back and says, okay, are all the 1s from positive and are all the 2s from negative, or from stressed? And if yes, then great, we've got a good calibration. You can proceed. If not, we continue to extend your calibration until we have a clear snapshot of what your movement looks like in a positive state versus what your movement looks like in a stress state. And then that is used as a baseline as you ask questions. So as you ask a question, my name is Kate, I do the gesture. It takes that data set from that gesture, my name is Kate, and says, does this look like a 1 or a 2? Oh, it's a 2. A 2 is false. Okay, so this is false, and it gives you the answer for false. So that's kind of an overview of the algorithm, if that helps.
And so you've been referencing this. I'm making this assumption. Have you been referencing this against some research that has been basically muscle testing against lie detectors? Is this how we're kind of connecting to the broader acceptance of the scientific validity of muscle testing?
Yeah, so Dr. Ann Jensen, who published her dissertation at Oxford in 2015, she did the manual muscle testing using a true versus a false statement, and the actual verity of the statement being the gold standard. So she's now an advisor of ours, a friend and advisor. She's really awesome. And she came to Florida, and we replicated the same research methods she used at Oxford using our technology. We did a pilot study, and we were able to achieve similar results to hers that she produced at Oxford using manual. And since then, we've actually been able to actually increase that accuracy against the data set. So by using sensors, we can actually get a higher output in terms of refining the accuracy level.
And what kind of sensors are you using?
So the gyroscope and accelerometer. So when you're holding your iPhone, sorry.
Well, I'm trying to get to how Ann Jensen did it. So I get that she's using muscle testing, but what's she referencing it against? What other diagnostic?
Well, the gold standard is the statement. So the way I can go through the method with you. The way it works, the participant would come in, they would sit in front of a computer, and then the computer would show a picture of a giraffe. This is all randomized, by the way. So it would show a picture of a giraffe, and then there would be an audio prompt that would say I see a car, and then the person would say, I see a car. And then there'd be a doctor who would do the manual muscle test, and they would all observe and see if the recoil was, if it went strong or weak or not. And that would be recorded. But it was the statement. So knowing that the statement itself is the standard. So knowing that it was a giraffe, it wasn't a car. A person said it was a car, and there's a noticeable difference in the movement of the deltoid.
Got it. Now I understand. So let's get to this distinction you were making, that this is topic specific. Right.
Yeah. So there's lots to be explored. And so to that point, just to kind of go into this conversation, what we did when we built Sensie, we actually built a research platform with it because we wanted to research lots. Because you can, theoretically, potentially use this for many different things, and we want to know what it's good for. And so we've done it with mindfulness, with meditation, positive psychology. We've done it with food allergy testing. We did it with most recently we started exploring. This is going to be our next launch. Actually, really excited about this. But we've been exploring identifying friends on Facebook that are sources of stress. So we think that our next release is going to be where we integrate social media and help empower people to identify sources of stress, and then we can provide interventions to help reduce it. One of the really cool things that it's also being used for, Dr. Jensen's research was at Oxford Center for Evidence-Based Medicine, and it was specifically around non-conscious emotions. And so she has a protocol called Heart Speak, where she uses muscle testing and Sensie to identify the root cause of stress. And I can go through how that works, but these are just sort of examples of all the different things that we've been exploring. So identifying unconscious emotions, identifying different wellness techniques, identifying food allergies. And we have a platform that's been helping us to sort of manage all the different studies. So did I answer that question okay? Was that what you're looking for?
Well, it seemed to me when you made the distinction earlier that you were saying it was more effective for some topics and less effective for other topics. So I was hoping you could explain what it was more effective and less effective for testing.
Yeah. I don't want to be declarative and say what it is and isn't, but I can talk about our results, because what we're learning is that there's so many different variables in play that can affect different studies. So, for example, detecting another thing we have right now in the app, we have a little blob in there, and you can affect the blob's emotion with your emotions. And we have really good accuracy for detecting happiness versus sadness. So we have high accuracy for detecting emotions. We had really poor accuracy when we tried to do a study on food allergy. It was actually food sensitivities. It wasn't food allergies. And I don't think it has to do with muscle testing as much as it does have to do with the way we structured the study. So the way we ask the question, so how you ask the question is almost more important than the technology itself. We actually, so if I can backtrack for 1 second, that's an important topic to touch on. Early in our work, we started seeing anomalies in the data. We didn't really understand it. And we got in touch with a guy at the Department of Defense who was a subject matter expert on polygraphs. And we told him about our work and what was going on and what we didn't understand. And he looked at me and was like, "That's the same problem we have with polygraphs. Exactly what you guys are facing, and the same issue that polygraphs have. So do we. Which is it's less about the technology and more about the protocol and how you structure questions." And that was a costly mistake for us, because the way we set up our food allergy study, the question we asked was, the researchers suggested, and we all agreed, to use the language from the IgE blood test. It was an IgE blood test, an IgE and IgG blood test versus Sensie. And the language from the blood test was, the food allergy blood test was, so I generate a autoimmune response to an antibody autoimmune response to, and then you say the food item, and then you do the gesture. And that might make sense for a doctor, but when individual people are making that statement, I think what was happening is they had no idea what they were saying. So we wound up getting really crappy results, which makes sense. That was sort of one of the takeaways for me. Also, I think food sensitivities is more of an art than a science. So we'd like to do that again, but do it against food allergies. So that was just sort of an overview of some of the variables that are at play that can affect accuracy and affect the quality of a muscle test, right? Is how you ask the question, if people are sufficiently hydrated, if the person understands what they're asking, that seems to affect it.
Yeah. Well, and you're asking questions that in many cases someone's you may not actually be conscious of the answer to the question, as if there's some other piece of the person that's answering the question. Does that make sense?
Right.
So can you
can
totally.
You
go into that? A lot of people would call that the subconscious or the unconscious. Can can you talk about the mechanic of how that works?
I wish I could. I mean, it's very tempting to say yes, and I can just spit out a bunch of opinions on that. But that is a world that I'm hoping our technology can help us better understand. And I think that topic is left better open for researchers who have dedicated their lives to exploring the unconscious, like Dr. Jensen has. I'd love to make a bunch of claims about the unconscious, and I can if you'd like, but I don't know if that'd be doing a service. You know,
Well, in
now,
any case, at least a part of what's happening is it really is based on the nervous system. What you're talking about is how the nervous system, consciousness is interfacing with the nervous system, and the nervous system is providing the signal to the muscle.
So okay, so I can talk about that. That's really interesting what you're hitting on there. So after we got our signal, we started telling everybody about we have this objective signal for muscle testing. There was disbelief, and what I realized was like, okay, we need a better like physiological understanding for what's going on. So we reached out to this doctor at University of Cambridge, who's doing amazing research on the physiology of risk taking. Really interesting neuroscientist. So we got Dr. Coates on the line and told him about our signal and what we think we have, and what he said to us is, it sounds like you have an objective signal for something called the Golgi tendon. Are you familiar with the Golgi tendon?
I am, but it would be good for you to explain that a little bit to the listeners.
Yeah. When he said that on the call, I was like, oh my God, what the hell is a Golgi tendon? I started Googling it, like, what is that? And thankfully in a second he explained. So I think a cool way to explain a Golgi tendon, and just like a fun way that everyone can identify with, is, have you ever picked up a weight and the weight was too heavy, so you put the weight down? Has that ever happened to you?
Yeah.
Yeah. How did you know that that weight was too heavy? It's something we don't ever really stop and ask. We just know that it was too heavy, so we put it down. But how? And that is the Golgi tendon. So the Golgi tendons are all through the body, and they connect muscle fiber to the skeletal wall. And Golgi tendons actually detect stress and tension in muscle fiber. So not just not just physical stress and tension, but psychological stress and tension too. So just think for a second of a time when you were stressed out, right? What does the body do? It tenses up, right? It balls up, your fists kind of clench, your muscles get kind of clenched up. The body is literally telling you, hey, let's move. You're frustrated, you're tense. Let's get this moving again. Let's get the energy going. And so the body is trying to inform the brain of, hey, something's not right here. Let's shake this off. And so the hypothesis that we're under right now is that what we really have is a signal for potentially a neuromuscular signal for these Golgi tendons that detect stress and tension in muscle fiber. And it's part of the nervous system. So yeah.
Yeah, and this is and because you're asking questions and you're getting responses of which someone may not consciously be aware of the answer. So let's throw something out there where what would be a good what would you say is a good reliable question to ask to Sensie app that someone can get some trusted information on?
Oh, good. Well, so we have protocols in the app. So when you open up Sensie app, the blob will load, and the blob is sort of this like initial onboarding path. It's still a beta product. We don't have like our first official consumer product out yet, but you can use the blob. So the blob will load, and you can interact with that, and you can explore regulating your emotions. Which by the way, just to touch on that really quickly, evoking and regulating emotions has been demonstrated out of University of Chicago's Human Performance Lab. It's been demonstrated as a way to defend against anxiety and depression. Your ability to evoke and basically have emotional flexibility. So Sensie in the blob is a tool for you to learn how to evoke emotions truly. And if you want to try a protocol and ask questions, you just go over to the profile page and you can enter in stress reduction, one word, and that will actually load Dr. Jensen's protocol. And Dr. Jensen's protocol, the way it works is you just think about a topic. You don't have to talk about it. You just think about a person, place, or thing in your life that is stressful to you, and then you tap the go button and you do the triple whip, Sensie sees the stress is present or not. It's really important that it's present because that means you're fully connected to the topic. Should I go over why that's important?
Yeah.
Being fully okay. Are you familiar with something called memory? It's something called memory reconsolidation. It's something neuroscience discovered a while ago.
No, it's a new one for me.
Okay, so this is super rad. So memory reconsolidation is basically how memory works. And we're doing it all the time. We just might not be aware of it. So have you ever been in the room with your parents where your dad tells a story and your mom is like, that's not how it happened?
Yep.
Yeah, happens all the time. Right. Totally. That's like, a leading question. So serving my own purpose here. So it's not that it might be, but it most likely isn't that your dad, it didn't happen that way, but it's the way memory works. So the way memory works is an event happens, it gets stored. Now, every time you recall that memory, you actually alter it. It gets reconsolidated and it gets restored. So over time, you actually reshape an event to the point where it's very different from how it actually initially occurred. And this is one of the reasons why eyewitness testimonies really don't stand anymore, right? Because memories aren't really reliable. But what's really fascinating about that is that you can apply that, or Dr. Jensen is applying that principle in her protocol to help people reshape and redefine stressful memories so that they can reprogram their own brain in a way that it's no longer stressful. And so coming back to Dr. Jensen's protocol, you have to bring the memory present in order to alter it, and you have to really connect to it. So by using Sensie to see, okay, is it present, or using muscle testing to see if it's present, you see that it is, stress is present, okay, you're fully connected. Now what Dr. Jensen's protocol does is it leads you through a series of questions to identify what the root emotion is. So is it sadness? So you declare, you say, it's sadness, and you do the triple whip. Sensie says, okay, is it true? Is it false? It's false. Okay, next question. Since it's false, it's not sadness. Is it anger? You state, it's anger. You do the triple whip. True, it's anger. Now what happens is Sensie plays a meditation which walks you through Dr. Jensen's emotional clearing technique, where you use embodiment, you use the posture of anger to bring anger fully present so that you can exhaust it and release it in a way that's controlled and, comfortable for you because you're the one driving. So you come in for anger, you come forward, you bring your hands into fists like a boxer, and you clench your fist, you clench your jaw, and you evoke anger. And once you feel like you've completed that, the meditation walks you through sitting up, opening your hands, and then evoking joy. And it walks you through the posture of joy so that you fully evoke joy. And what you're doing is using memory reconsolidation to alter that stressful memory, releasing the emotional charge of anger or whatever the negative emotion was, the stressful emotion was that was associated with it, and replacing it with a beneficial one so that the next time you recall that memory, you're not stressed by it. I find her protocol to be one of the most fascinating things, and it's been one of the more beneficial techniques I've used in my personal life as well.
Oh, that's great. And is that something that listeners could learn more about at your blog?
Yeah, so my blog, and also you can go to her website, heartspeak.com is Dr. Jensen's website. And then if you download Sensie app, you can use the activation code stress reduction, one word, and that will load the protocol. And the protocol comes with an introduction video. So the very first activity you do is a video explaining how it works. It's like a 1-minute video. And then it'll walk you through using the protocol so you can try, sort of that memory alteration and stress reduction technique.
Okay. Now, have you done any tests on non-local muscle testing where, I guess you know what I'm asking.
Keep going, please ask. Keep going.
Let's say you're holding your phone with the app open, and you want to test as Jonathan, me. You want to basically be my proxy. Have you done anything with that test?
We haven't, but we want to. That's something that Thomas wants to do, my partner.
Any thoughts on non-local testing?
We would like to do it, but we have no data for it yet. I think it'd be very cool. Let's do it. Let's do it together. Let's rally a group and let's see. We need to determine a method where we can ask questions that we can, without any degree of uncertainty, know that it's accurate. So it'd be cool to have you and Thomas sort of formulate that method or that
Oh,
protocol.
hey, I would love to participate in any way. I'm not sure I'd be the best guy for the job, but it's interesting because I know a lot of people that do non-local testing, and it's something I'm actually going to something here in the next couple of days that a training that claims it can teach me how to do it. So
Dr. Jensen, sorry to interrupt. Dr. Jensen does Skype sessions where she'll do the HeartSpeak protocol. If you don't want to use technology and you want to have a session with her specifically, because she's a little bit more intuitive with it. She's an empath, and she'll do it over Skype where she uses her body to determine what is going on with you. And I mean, she's nailed some things in my life that were like mind blowing to me. So I believe, based on watching other people do it, I believe it's a possibility. We just haven't tried it yet with our technology.
Yeah, well, it brings in a whole bunch of other questions, doesn't it? It's one thing if you're there locally and you're pushing on someone's arm or you're doing the triple whip, but it's an entirely other thing if you're able to do this with the same level of accuracy test from 1,000 miles away. And one of the investigations of this podcast is into the biofield. And in the past, interviewing a few biofield researchers, and especially Shamini Jain, who runs sort of the major biofield research foundation in San Diego, is that there's a definitive aspect of the biofield that is non-local.
Right. I totally agree with that. I mean, I don't believe that consciousness is local. I mean, my personal belief is that consciousness is not local, and I've had experiences, some very painful, that have helped me to see that. So I'm a believer. Personally, I'm a believer. And I would like to explore that. And I think the field of quantum physics has shown this as well, right? So it's all around us and in us. And I'd love to explore that.
Now, do you guys have any aspect? Do you guys look at the autonomic nervous system at all in your way of looking at muscle testing?
Well, so no, definitely. So I think that's the big breakthrough we've had, right? And you're seeing, like HeartMath has been championing this for a while. They've really been on the edge of bringing forward this type of innovation. And because what was it, 10 or 15 years ago, with the advent of the fMRI, you have a breakthrough in an understanding of its non-duality, where we have you have a thought, and that thought is happening through the whole system simultaneously, and that's what our technology is picking up on. Is the same thing they're using these huge fMRIs for. We're picking up with an iPhone, which is the second you make a statement, a true or false statement, and you're just jiggling your iPhone, that jiggle is being altered based on the words you're speaking. And for sure, the autonomic nervous system is the grapevine for that. It's the process, the whole machine that's processing it. And then you toggle over to the fMRI studies, and that's what they're seeing too. You've probably seen some of the stuff out of HeartMath where someone sits in the fMRI and they generate happy thoughts or happy feelings, and you see these neurochemicals in the brain being produced, and then running down into the body and latching onto tissues in the bodies and becoming hormones, which are now becoming feelings. And this is a chemical process that's happening at the speed of electricity, right? And our understanding is that for 100%, this has got to be driven. I would imagine a large part of this is driven by the autonomic nervous system. We're not neuroscientists, we're engineers and entrepreneurs. But from everything that we've learned online and from the different doctors we've spoken with, it definitely seems that this is a large part of it.
Well, good. Let's get to how, if at all, people can experiment and play with Sensie app.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for asking that. So if you download the app right now, it's a beta. So there's a little blob that comes on and kind of walks you through about a conversation around stress. We built the app to help kids learn, the beta app, to help kids learn their emotions, right? Specifically learning how to regulate their emotions. So stress is directly correlated with negative affect. So negative or stressful emotions. And so if you download it, you'll calibrate the app. The blob will walk you through calibrating it. It's a little funny animation. He flexes his butt and does like funny things. We have a really good animator out of LA. But after you get done calibrating, it'll ask you to try different emotions, and then you'll get to a sandbox where it says, evoke any emotion you want to, and and affect Sensie with it, and Sensie will take on the emotional state that you're in, whether it's stressed or no stress. And what we're doing on the back end of it, we're doing in a sort of a closed beta research around different stress reduction techniques with different doctors. So if you want to try Dr. Jensen's protocol, as I mentioned before, it's stress reduction is the activation code, and you can use that to open up her protocol in the app and try a stress reduction technique that might help you reduce any sort of topic of stress that's in your life. Yeah.
How far away you guys from an Android app?
So we're gonna do a fundraising round actually in the next couple of months here, and that's the next wave is two things: Android, and then also integrating social media. So we're really excited about that idea of helping people, both Android and iOS, to identify people and events in social media that are topics of stress, so they can kind of create this like stress quotient, if you will, or stress score of them and their community. So their effect on the community and the community's effect on themselves. And then identify specific topics of stress to people, so that they can be empowered to reduce it. So many people think that like, oh, John stresses me, he's out of my life, and the fact is that no, you stress yourself. Like, it's your perception of John, unless John's being abusive, and that's a different conversation. But most cases with stress, it's your perception, and you can alter your perception, and so bringing in these different protocols to help people do that and elevate awareness, and that's our mission, is to elevate awareness and create a tool that can help create the conditions to end suffering. Because suffering is a major problem right now for our world, and it's something that's just potentially misunderstood. So
in other words, you may still be able to keep John in your life if you just.
Oh, heck yeah, man! Yeah, exactly. And that's the point, right? Like, you can go to Thanksgiving dinner and sit with Uncle Bill, and not be affected, and be at peace. You can be in the presence of something that was stressful and not be stressed. You don't have to have other people in control of your life. You can be in control of it. Well, I don't know about control. Control is an illusion, but that's another topic. But you don't have to be stressed, is the point.
Well, Mike, if people have feedback for you or like to get in touch with you, what would be the best way to do that?
Oh yeah, Mike at Sensie app. So SENSIEAPP.com, and Mike MIKE. Mike at SensieApp.com.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Mike, for coming on.
Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure, man. I hope it was helpful, and stoked about your interest in muscle testing.